From Georgetown University's Institute of Politics and Public Service and the Associated Press, this is the GOP Presidential Candidates Conversations on national security and foreign policy. Live from across the United States at the University of New Hampshire, at Iowa State University, at Clemson University in South Carolina, and at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And now, from Gaston Hall, here is Georgetown's Mo Alifi and the AP's Anna Johnson.
Welcome, everybody. So excited to see this crowd. On behalf of the Institute of Politics and Public Service here at Georgetown, welcome to historic Gaston Hall as we kick off this series of conversations. Could not be more proud to be partnering with one of the greatest media organizations in the world, the Associated Press, as we kick off this important series. Look, I'm a School of Foreign Service alum myself. We live in an increasingly interconnected world. And the candidates running for president have very different visions on what America's role should look like in the world. This series, true to the mission of the Institute, is to pull back the curtain and do a deep dive with the candidates one-on-one to sort of explore what that vision looks like. And Anna, we have a great crowd of students here in Gaston Hall ready to geek out and dive deep with the candidates.
We really do. Thanks so much, Mo. The Associated Press is absolutely thrilled to be co-hosting this event with Georgetown University. It really shows our commitment to fact-based, nonpartisan journalism that dives deeply into the most important global issues. Not only are we joined today with students from Georgetown University, we have students from 3 other universities joining us today: Iowa State University, the University of New Hampshire, and Clemson University. Students are going to be joining via live video and will also have an opportunity to ask questions as well. For this event series, we invited all of the Republican presidential candidates who qualified for the first debate. We look forward to continuing the conversation with them and the eventual presidential nominees at later dates.
Look, one of the things I love the most about working on a university campus is the free flow of ideas that takes place here. That's the whole point. In a few minutes, we're going to hear and be able to have one of those, that free flow of ideas with one of the leading candidates for President of the United States. But here's the dirty little secret. We did not bring him here to give him a platform to share his worldview with you. We brought him here to give all of you a platform to ask him whatever questions you want about that worldview. That's what college is really about. Pull no punches. Do so respectfully, but do so directly. Challenge him, ask him questions, and most importantly, listen to his answers. So, to that point, allow me to join me in welcoming the student who is going to introduce our moderator, who's a Hoya, by the way, and the first presidential candidate in this series, Armenia Sharma, a senior in the School of Foreign Service, co-chair of our Institute Student Advisory Board. Armenia?
Thanks for the introduction, Mo. Hi, everyone. My name is Armenia Sharma, and I'm a senior in the School of Foreign Service. I'm the undergraduate chair for Geopolitics Student Advisory Board, and I'm chair on the SFS Academic Council. At a critical juncture in the global order today, we are fortunate to be joined tonight by a man who has seen it all and done it all, alongside decision makers and institutions. And I think it goes without saying that if we didn't listen to the other side, engage in political dialogue, we wouldn't be able to get things done today. So tonight, as you tune in to the event, I encourage all of you, as Mo said, to listen carefully and engage with the other side. Michael R. Pence is the 48th Vice President of the United States. Prior to serving in the White House, Vice President Pence served as the 50th governor of Indiana and represented East Central Indiana for 6 terms in Congress, including stints in the House Foreign Affairs Committee and leadership roles in the Republican caucus. The Vice President will take your questions in a discussion moderated by Meg Kennard, who is a Georgetown alumna and an Associated Press reporter. So, Without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Vice President Mike Pence and AP's Meg Kennard.
Mr. Vice President, thank you so much for being here with us today. Greatly appreciate it. And welcome to all of you for joining us for this first in a series of conversations sponsored between the Associated Press and Georgetown University with Republican presidential contenders for 2024. We're so glad that all of you are here with us today. I want to get right into it. We have a lot of questions. I have some. Georgetown students have some. And also our students at other satellite campuses have plenty to talk about today. So I apologize if I move this conversation along pretty quickly. It's not me being rude. It's just me wanting to give the students the most time to talk.
Well, it's not the first time you've interviewed me, Meg, so I'm used to it. How about a round of applause for Associated Press and Georgetown and Clemson and the University of New Hampshire and Iowa State. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very much. Let's get right into it.
You bet.
One of the first things that I want to talk to you about is Ukraine. Why is it important for the United States to continue to support Ukraine?
Such an important place to start, and I appreciate it very much. Look, I'm running for President of the United States because I think this country's in a lot of trouble. I think Joe Biden has weakened our country at home and abroad. I think the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan has emboldened the enemies of freedom around the world. And now war is raging in Eastern Europe as Russia continues to prosecute its unprovoked and unconscionable invasion of Ukraine. And as a leader of the free world, I believe it's incumbent on the United States of America to continue to provide the support to the Ukrainian military so that they can defeat and repel that Russian invasion and reclaim their sovereignty. Now, the reason for that is not some of the reasons that you may have heard. I know President Biden has taken to talking about our need to defend democracy in Ukraine. Well, I've met President Zelensky. I'm not certain that Ukraine doesn't have a lot of progress to make in democracy and in combating corruption. And I confronted President Zelensky the first time we met on that very same issue. I think the reason why the United States should continue to support the military in Ukraine as they fight to defeat and repel the Russian invasion is because it's in our national interest to do it. It was back in 1985, Ronald Reagan articulated a policy that came to be known as the Reagan Doctrine. It was simply this: if you're willing to fight the communists in your country with your soldiers, we'll give you the means to fight them there so we don't have to fight them. Now, I will tell you, the young men and women who are here and those that are looking on, I believe that if Vladimir Putin and the Russian military overruns Ukraine, it will not be long before they cross a border of a NATO country where our men and women in uniform would be required to go and fight.
So if I may, getting directly to that assistance that you're talking about and that support, then the temporary spending measure passed over the weekend and signed by the president did not include any aid for Ukraine. Would you have supported that, and is that the right way to keep the government operating even on a temporary basis?
Well, I think continuing resolutions represent a failure of the Congress to do its job. But I'm going to continue to be a strong voice for American support for weapons for Ukraine. I mean, think about this for just a moment if you can. It's been a year and a half since Vladimir Putin launched his unconscionable and brutal invasion of Ukraine. But during that time, with 5% of our defense budget, in a year and a half, the military in Ukraine has held on to 85% of their soil, and Russia has gone from the second most powerful military in the world to the second most powerful military in Ukraine. That's what we call progress. And so I really do believe that whatever the machinations in the Congress of the United States, I'm going to continue to be a strong voice in the Republican Party. America is the leader of the free world. If we're not leading the free world's not being led. And I believe that the best way to check China's ambitions in the Asia Pacific is to continue to give the Ukrainian military what they need to repel the Russian invasion. As I said in a debate, a quiet, kind of boring debate last week at the Reagan Library, I really do believe that if Russia overruns Ukraine, that'll give a green light. That'll give a green light to China to move against Taiwan. And quite frankly, if we don't check the efforts by authoritarian regimes to redraw international lines by force, the rest of the 21st century could look a lot like the first half of the 20th century.
We're going to talk more about potential issues involving China and Taiwan in a moment, but do you feel that opposition within the Republican Party to helping out countries like Ukraine, does that give Putin a window? Does that concern you specifically?
Well, isolationism is not a new thought in America. And frankly, it was John Quincy Adams that said America should never go abroad looking for monsters to destroy. That was his quote. And we never have. I mean, the war in Ukraine is not our war, but freedom is our fight. And I really do believe that it's what I think is undermining the traditional support among Republicans for arms for Ukraine is the fact that I think President Biden has done a terrible job explaining what our interest is there. These gauzy speeches about democracy just don't connect with the American public. And frankly, also, I think that disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan undermined public confidence in the president's leadership as commander-in-chief. And that's why we need new leadership in the White House, leadership that can marshal the energies and the resources of the American people. And the last thing is, there are voices in our party, Meg, that suggest that we have to choose between securing our border, reviving our economy, and unleashing American energy and being the leader of the free world. I think that's a false choice. I think we can do both. And anyone that says that we can't solve our problems here at home and be the leader of the free world has a pretty small view of the greatest nation on earth. We can do both. And if I'm president of the United States, I promise you we will.
Well, then to follow up on that specifically, you know, that is a good idea to handle issues both domestic and foreign simultaneously. That's something that everyone seeking to be president would say that they aim to do. But even as evidence today, as we're seeing play out in the House of Representatives with issues surrounding Republican Speaker Kevin McCarthy and whether he's going to maintain that position, then when there's that level of division within the Republican Party, how do you really seek to unite some of those voices so you can accomplish what you say you'd like to do?
Well, I still believe a majority of Republicans and a strong majority of Americans understand we're the leader of the free world and want to see America continue to provide support for the military in Ukraine with accountability, no blank checks, but to continue to give them the means to repel that Russian aggression. But I don't know if what's happening on Capitol Hill today suggests a great deal of division in the Republican Party. I mean, I think what you're witnessing is a handful of Republicans partnering with Democrats in Congress to create chaos and oust a sitting Speaker of the House. And I must tell you, this is one of the days that I don't miss being in Congress. The truth is, the chaos that we're seeing on Capitol Hill today is just one more reason why the American people want to see new leadership. Look, we've got to have leadership in the White House. We've got to have leadership at every level in this country that is focused on what the American people are focused on. This is a very difficult time in the life of our nation. It's an increasingly dangerous time in the life of the world. And I'm determined to bring the kind of leadership that can marshal the energies of all of the American people to meet that moment.
Another issue that I'd like to switch to, as alluded earlier, is China. There's a perception that Chinese President Xi Jinping has a centralization of power that's been unmatched in recent history. How would you work with him? And as president, how would you effort to change his mind on issues that you would view as important to the United States?
Well, Meg, as you said before, these things are inextricably linked. It's one big world. And I really do believe the most effective way to check China's ambitions in the Asia Pacific is for the United States and the Western world to stand strong with the military in Ukraine. Weakness arouses evil. And I really do believe that President Xi, who has called himself an unlimited partner of Russia, there's apparently no amount of war crimes, there's apparently no amount of brutality that the Russian military could commit as they have in Ukraine. I was there a few months back. I stood where there was once a mass grave. 550 people were buried outside of a church in Bucha. I saw photographs of men, women, and children who were literally gunned down in the street while they were coming back from shopping and groceries, and then they were left in the street. And when family members came out to collect their remains, the family members were shot. I mean, but China has said we're an unlimited partner, and of course Iran is continuing to provide weaponry and drones. Look, I led the administration's effort in articulating a new policy toward China in 2018. You all can go look it up. I gave a speech in 2018 at the Hudson Institute in which we said, after years of trade abuses, after years of intellectual property theft, after years of military provocations in the Asia Pacific, and human rights abuses against Muslim Uyghurs and Christian pastors in China, we said things are going to change, and they did. Our administration imposed $250 billion in tariffs on China. We made record investments in our military to make it clear that we would see to our interests in the Asia Pacific. Look, it is a cliche, but cliches are grounded in truth. Peace comes through strength. And the best way we can confront China, which is the greatest economic and strategic threat the United States faces in the 21st century, is with strength. And as I said in a follow-on speech a couple weeks ago at the Hudson Institute, went back to the same place 6 years later, I said, look, we've got to build a military fitted to the times, which we're still the most powerful military in the world, but China's working every day to catch up and pass us by. We've got to build out a navy. We've got to build out a military that will deter military ambitions of China. And secondly, I think we need to use access to our economy to bring China to the table, to end the intellectual property theft and trade abuses and leave aside their provocations and human rights abuses in recent years. So we're the most powerful economy on earth. We're the most powerful military on earth. We need to use that American strength to continue to invite China into the family of nations, but to make it clear that America is prepared to defend our economy and defend our interests wherever they're challenged in the world.
Well, speaking of that strength, then, would you see your administration as moving more away from strategic ambiguity to strategic clarity when it comes to Taiwan and potentially getting involved with U.S. forces there?
Well, strategic ambiguity is one of those peculiar oddities of history that was negotiated many, many years ago with China. I know one of my competitors in the Republican primaries said that we would make a commitment to defend Taiwan until 2028 when we got our microchip industry back, and then we'd go back to ambiguity. It doesn't seem very ambiguous to me. That seems like a flashing green light for China to move on Taiwan. Look, I think I'm someone that believes you never tell the enemy what you'll never do. The point is you want a military strong enough that Taiwan, with whom we provide military support, is fully armed, fully capable of defending themselves, and that our allies in the region are fully prepared to see to the interest of free nations. And then you never have to answer that question.
We have a lot of young voters joining us today here in Gaston Hall as well as across the country. So I can't move off of issues related to China without asking you about TikTok. TikTok claims 150 million U.S. users, and a recent survey showed that nearly half of Americans ages 18 through 34 have opened accounts on the platform. Is it realistic, then, you've talked about wanting to ban TikTok, is it realistic to ask those millions of users to just give it up? Well,
I don't know about realistic, but it's the right idea. I mean, if you're comfortable with the Chinese Communist Party gathering personal information on you through TikTok, go right ahead. But that's what they're doing. I mean, TikTok is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. It is penetrating our economy. It is gathering private information on Americans every single hour of every single day. And look, I got 3 kids. They're all married. 2 of them have families in the service. So I know about your generation. I'm all about it, right? I'm still kind of a dad, you know. I'm still catching up with social media every day. So I know how much you live on that communication with each other. But you got to know TikTok's different. There's a reason why we banned it from the federal government. There's a reason why we have states around the country that are banning it. It's because it compromises privacy. And China today, you need to understand, we can document that China steals billions of dollars of intellectual property every year from the United States. And so if you don't think that they're not gathering, collecting, collating, and preserving information about you, you have, as we like to say, another thing coming. So my word to young people, my word of every American is that TikTok is not consistent with the privacy rights of Americans. I won't tell you what platforms to use, where to post your videos, but I'll do what I can as if I'm President of the United States to make sure that we don't have a platform operating in America that compromises the privacy rights of Americans.
One last question before we move on to something else. I've done some reporting around TikTok and its use by one of your rivals, Vivek Ramaswamy. He's the only GOP hopeful right now on TikTok. And when we reached out to the company to ask about some of those concerns that you just noted with the platform, their argument to us was that banning it is actually not a conservative move at all, that something more conservative, they argue, would be more along the lines of a national privacy law. What do you make of that assertion?
Well, I got to know Vivek a couple of years ago. He wrote a good book, Woke Incorporated, and he's a good man. He's a good family man. He's just wrong about a lot. And he's wrong about TikTok. Of course, he wasn't always wrong. About 6 months ago, Vivek Ramaswamy actually said TikTok was, quote, digital fentanyl for America's youth. And then a couple of weeks ago, he had dinner with a TikTok executive and signed up for TikTok. I just believe in telling people the truth, whether it's comfortable or not. It's one of the reasons why I'm one of the few candidates running for president that's been telling the American people that we're facing a debt crisis. And I know we're here to talk about foreign policy, but I have to tell you, I think we have to produce leadership at the national level that's willing to be honest with younger Americans, all those who are here and those that are looking on, and tell you that $33 trillion national debt, if you don't elect a president that's willing to reform Social Security and Medicare, that's going to grow by a factor of 5 in the next 20 years. And if you think inflation is bad today with $33 trillion in debt, buckle up when it's $150 trillion. I mean, so whether the TikTok issue, I'll just be honest with people, and I just don't see how there is no private enterprise in China. The Chinese Communist Party, under Chinese law, has access to all the data of every company in China. And so if you think you can be involved every day sharing private information and funny videos and memories of your day with friends and neighbors and not understand that that's being collected somewhere and saved somewhere in the event that it might be useful, you ought to think harder about it.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move along to discussing Army General Mark Milley, who recently concluded his term as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He has emphasized what he sees as the importance of taking his oath to the Constitution and not to a specific leader. That's the same kind of notion that you discuss a lot. Even the title of your book, So Help Me God, you referenced that, and that there was the Constitution and not anyone else. I have some further questions, but first, how would you evaluate General Milley's service as chairman of the Joint Chiefs?
Well, I haven't agreed with every recent decision that's been made at the Pentagon during his tenure as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but I honor General Milley's service to the country, 4 decades in the uniform of the United States. And frankly, what Donald Trump said about him in that tweet, about treason and death, was utterly inexcusable. I truly do believe that we owe a debt of gratitude to men and women that serve in uniform that we can never fully repay. My dad was a combat veteran in Korea. My son's a captain in the Marine Corps. My son-in-law is a lieutenant in the Navy. I mean, the men and women who put on the uniform of the United States, whether our politics agrees with them or not on any particular issue, deserve the respect of every American, and I honor his service to the country.
You referenced the former president's comments about General Milley. During his retirement ceremony, General Milley made comments that were perceived as him taking a swipe at the former president. Again, going back to that oath I mentioned, saying that he made reference to a wannabe dictator, something that's perceived as being a reference to President Trump. What do you make of that comment by General Milley?
Well, I wouldn't have a comment on that characterization or who he was alluding to, but as I've said, I thought he made a very eloquent point, Meg, that in the days leading up to January 6th, my son, the Marine, reminded me of the same thing. See, January 6th was a tragic day, but I must tell you, I believe by God's grace, I did my duty that day. So I kept my oath to the Constitution of the United States of America. And what General Milley said that day in his valedictory, beyond some of the more covered phrases, was he said it's important to remember that the members of our armed forces, elected officials, we all take the same oath. It's to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to bear true faith and allegiance to the same. You take the obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. And you commit yourself to well and faithfully execute the duties of the office. And it ends with a prayer, so help me God. And as I wrote in that book that I appreciate you mentioning, it was a promise that I made when I was sworn in as vice president. It's a promise I made when I was a member of Congress, when I was a governor. It's a promise I made to the American people. And it's a promise that I made to God. And I really believe it's important for us to remember that what makes America special is not who we are or what our background is, what our ethnic background is. It's a set of ideals that are captured in that Declaration of Independence, in the Constitution of the United States. And I really do believe that if we will return our nation to focusing there, we'll find a way to go forward, heal our land, and build a boundless future on the liberties and principles enshrined there.
Thank you for that. Now we're going to go to a question from here in Gaston Hall at Georgetown University.
Hi, Mr. Vice President. My name is Aaron Magtoto, and my question is, with the decision to add additional members to BRICS, how should the U.S. respond to expand membership? Thank you.
It's a terrific question, and I'm very impressed with it because nobody's talking about it. I mean, they just met, China and Russia and the BRIC countries just met in Africa and added to their numbers. And with the exception of the Associated Press, nobody really covered it very much. And make no mistake about it, nature abhors a vacuum, and right now, America has created a vacuum of leadership on the world stage. I mean, and I think it's a result of that disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan that's undermined confidence in the United States, but it's also that national debt. That now you have China and other countries in that BRIC coalition that are actually, they're taking steps to try and replace the American dollar as the reserve currency in the world. And they're pointing to American debt as one of the reasons to do that. And so I really do believe that we need to, number one, we need to tackle our challenges here at home. We need to lift the burden of debt off your generation and the ones that follow. But also, I'm somebody that believes that while we're very tough on China, and I think we ought to put more sanctions and more tariffs on China to bring them to the table of reform. I believe in free trade with free nations. And that as you see China and Russia and other nations beginning to form a coalition among those regimes, I think we ought to be looking to strengthen our economic ties with free nations around the country. I began the discussions with Japan over a free trade agreement. The Biden administration's done nothing to pursue it. We were going to have a free trade agreement with UK as soon as they got out of Brexit. The Biden administration's done nothing to pursue it. The same with the European Union. So to me, that's the key going forward. That's the right response to BRIC. And it's a tremendous question. So well done.
Thank you. Next, we are going to go to the University of New Hampshire for a question from our students there.
Good.
Hi, I'm Anna Anderson. I'm a freshman at UNH, and my question was, how do you think that the U.S. should be responding to cyber attacks?
Well, Anna, thank you, and greetings in New Hampshire. It's wonderful to have you all join us. I appreciate you making time. How do we respond? I love what's implied in your answer, which is how should we respond to cyber attacks, because they're continuous and ongoing. When I was governor of the state of Indiana, we had data silos. Just as an example, we had data silos for taxpayers in Indiana. And I'll never forget, one of my early briefings was that we had roughly 500,000 hacks a day trying to get into our data systems. We've had states around the country that have seen their entire data compromised. We talked about TikTok a little earlier. There are interests around the world that are constantly trying to collect information on Americans. And those cyber attacks happen constantly in public institutions. And of course, we've seen the blackmail that's taken place in business institutions. My answer to your question, which I think is a terrific one, is that the best defense is a good offense. And when it came to cybersecurity in our elections in 2018, we actually authorized elements of the Defense Intelligence Agency in ways I can't fully talk about, but to go on offense against those who would attempt to disrupt our elections and engage in the kind of cyber attacks on our election infrastructure around the country. And we were largely, I think, almost entirely successful in that regard. So that my short answer to your question is a good offense is a good defense, that we ought to continue to lean in to use our immense cyber capability to keep those that are trying to intrude on our country back on our heels. But it takes eternal vigilance and an understanding just how constant that effort is around the world toward individuals, institutions, and private enterprise.
Thank you. Next, we are going to go to a question from Iowa State University.
Hello, my name is Aiden Perry. My question has to do with Nagorno-Karabakh. Following recent events in Nagorno-Karabakh, the Azeri government has been expressing territorial ambitions over the sovereign territory of Armenia. My question is, what would your administration do to prevent Azeri aggression against Armenia?
Well, thank you for the question. And I must tell you that I've had people who care deeply about this begin to talk about what amounts to a genocide by starvation that's taking place in that region. And I think it's one more example of the need for strong, consistent American leadership on the world stage. And I know this is unwelcome to some people that have a different partisan perspective than me, but I must tell you that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is Vladimir Putin is responsible for it, but I believe it never would have happened without that disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan that literally saw the Afghan government collapse. And it's that vacuum of leadership that we're continuing to see other nations in the world move against other populations regionally, and the Armenian population is among them, that is going unchecked. And I really do believe it's one of the reasons why I like to say this is no time for on-the-job training. Meg, as you know, I was not only Vice President of the United States, traveled the world representing our country, met leaders of countries around the world, both our allies and our would-be adversaries. But also, I spent 10 years on the International Relations Committee in the House of Representatives and traveled as well. I have a deep appreciation for these challenges. I was there and recognized the earlier 100 years ago Armenian genocide. I fought for that recognition when I was in the Congress, and I want you to know that we're watching very carefully and prepared to exercise leadership on behalf of Armenians and people in that region today.
Thank you. Now we're going to Clemson University for another question.
Hello, my name is Emily Cope, and I'm a Young Women for America ambassador at Clemson University. My question for you is, what do you believe the current state of religious liberty is around the world? And what would your administration's top priorities be in advancing that liberty around the globe?
Well, thank you for a wonderful question. And let me say I'm very proud of our administration's record on behalf of religious liberty. It's rightly understood to be our first freedom. People that came to this country in the early days came for religious liberty, and making sure that we had appointments to our courts, making sure we had policies that respected the freedom of religion of every American, of every faith, was a priority for us. But also advancing religious liberty in the world, holding up that beacon of hope, championing the cause of religious liberty on the world was also a priority. Ambassador Sam Brownback was a former governor, a former senator who served as our ambassador for religious liberty around the world. He was intimately involved in an effort that I was also very involved in freeing Pastor Andrew Brunson from incarceration in Turkey. Pastor Brunson was literally arrested, incarcerated, and threatened with decades of time in jail in Turkey for simply living out his faith. And we brought, not only was Ambassador Brownback there day in and day out during the trials, but we brought economic pressure and the threat of sanctions that ultimately resulted in President Erdogan seeing his way clear to release Pastor Brunson. And we did the same with people that were incarcerated around the world. We worked hard to bring hostages home, including 3 men who were men of profound Christian faith who were detained in North Korea. And I'll never forget that being at 3 in the morning, standing at Andrews Air Force Base the day that those 3 Americans came down the stairs, and I've still got the 3x5 card that they handed. They handed one to me and one to Secretary of State and others with a wonderful Bible verse about when the captives are set free. But they were people of profound faith. And I think it's absolutely essential that the United States first defend our first freedom at home and the freedom of conscience of every American to believe or not to believe according to the dictates of your conscience. And I'm a Christian and cherish my Bible-based beliefs, but if I'm your president, I'll fight for the right of every American to believe or not to believe. But I think it's also important for America to continue, as we sought to do, to be a champion of religious liberty around the world, and we will.
Thank you. We have another question from here at Georgetown University.
Thank you, and thank you for being here today, Mr. Vice President. My name is Theo Menon, and I'm a graduate student here. The future of PEPFAR has been thrown into doubt due to fighting on Capitol Hill. What are your views on the future of PEPFAR?
Well, we had a very good vote just a couple days ago, which I was very pleased to see. I was in the Congress when President Bush passed PEPFAR, which was the Africa AIDS legislation. And it took some doing to get it done. I remember it was one of those things we took up on the International Relations Committee. There was a real concern that wanting to provide resources to combat AIDS would not inadvertently candidly support abortion across Africa. I mean, I'm pro-life. I hold that view very dear. But I also was deeply concerned about the pandemic that was literally poised to claim millions of lives on the African continent. And I honestly think that the recent vote in the Congress, where they found another way to reauthorize that program, and they found a way to do so in a way that respects the values of Americans that cherish traditional values and the right to life, was a real accomplishment. I mean, on a day when we're seeing a lot of chaos on Capitol Hill, that vote recently on PEPFAR was a great encouragement. I will tell you, I think I didn't always agree with President George W. Bush, particularly when it came to spending. And I fought against big government republicanism when I was in the Congress. But I think that the PEPFAR program, the AIDS Africa program, was one of the signature achievements of his administration, and it demonstrated the compassion and care of the American people to the wider world, and I'm pleased to see it reauthorized.
Thank you for that. We're going to stick with students here in Georgetown. We have another question here in Gaston Hall.
Hello, Mr. Vice President.
Hi.
My name is Namir Pasha. I'm from Azerbaijan. So I was also wondering, as an Azeri, if you were elected into office, what would your foreign policy be in regards to helping create change and peace in the Nagorno-Karabakh region?
Well, for me, it's just all begins with engagement and strength, and doing it in a way that puts American interests and American values in the forefront. And so, I would tell you that I honestly believe what I said earlier, that if America's not leading the free world's not being led. If we're not marshaling the attention and the focus of the free world, we miss opportunities profoundly in that region and elsewhere. So it'll be one of engagement. And again, I want to say I really want to put to the lie this notion that we've got to choose between solving problems here at home and leading and engaging in the world. America can do both. We have done both. And we will do both again. We can get our economy moving. We can secure our border. We can be a leader in energy in the world again. We can protect our liberties and strengthen our nation and engage the wider world where the needs arise.
Thank you. Yet again, we're going to stick with Georgetown. We have another question from our students here.
Howdy, my name is John Plummer.
Hi, John. Howdy.
What is your stance on China's growing influence in Africa?
Well, first, thanks for knowing about it. A lot of people don't. China's been engaging in something called debt diplomacy for some time. We sought to confront it by making investments in countries in the Asia Pacific. But debt diplomacy is essentially this notion where China provides funds for oftentimes second and third world countries, knowing full well that they can't pay back those funds. And then in exchange for that, they garner closer ties and in some cases, military bases to be built. I mean, we're seeing China make these kind of investments, not just on the African continent, but in Central America and in South America. And I must tell you, it's one of the reasons why I think the time has come for us to in a very real sense, send a message to the wider world that we need a 21st century Monroe Doctrine that says to nations around the world that this is a hemisphere of freedom. And that we're going not only to compete, but where possible, we're going to put barriers to the kind of investment that could undermine the long-term interests of freedom in the Western Hemisphere. But on the African continent, it's to your point, it's the Chinese investment there is significant. It's one of the reasons why the United States with regard to our posture and our engagement in the world and with regard to foreign aid needs to be prepared to compete. Because, look, these nations don't want to deal with China. They want to deal with the United States of America. I believe it with all my heart. And yet, in the absence of that, they will go for the resources, even if it means the loss of control over aspects of their own future and their own sovereignty.
Thank you. We're going to go back to the University of New Hampshire, where we have another question.
Great.
Where we have another question. Great.
Hi again. My next question would be, do you consider climate change to be a security issue? And how would you address it as such?
Well, let me first say the climate is changing. It is. I mean, there's modest changes over the next 100 years. The question is, what do you do about it? I know there's a lot of very drastic language that gets thrown around about this. One prominent member of Congress was talking about the seas rising in the next 10 years if we didn't deal with climate change in an aggressive way. For my part, where I do think that there's a national security aspect to this is that for the free world to prosper, America has to prosper. And for America to prosper, we've got to make sure that what we do in this space does not hamper the American economy and American families and businesses at the expense of our country and the advantage of other countries. I mean, we got out of the Paris Climate Accord because it expected immediate things of the United States in terms of reducing our carbon footprint. But it required 10 years from now China to reduce carbon and India even farther out than that. We got out of the Paris Climate Accord. But what you may not know is through innovation and through diversifying energy sources, we reduced our carbon output during our administration more than what the Paris Climate Accord required. So I think the real answer here is to continue to promote American innovation and all of the above energy strategy, even while we commit ourselves to clean air, water, land, and if America is strong, America will be secure and the world will be more peaceful.
Thank you. And I'm going to interrupt with some breaking news. Mr. Vice President, Democrats have joined with Republicans to oust Kevin McCarthy from the speakership of the U.S. House of Representatives. Clearly, this is developing as we are talking right now, but with a development like this, what sort of a message do you see something like this sending to other countries about the stability of U.S. government? I mean, the Speaker of the House is arguably the most powerful member of that chamber. And what do you think this says to countries who are looking at what's happening here?
Well, let me say that chaos is never America's friend. And it's never a friend of American families that are struggling. And I'm deeply disappointed that a handful of Republicans would partner with all the Democrats in the House of Representatives to oust the Speaker of the House. But I expect before the week is out, there'll be more votes on who will be elected Speaker of the House. And I expect that most of the Republicans in the Congress will vote again for Kevin McCarthy, the way they voted 15 times over earlier in the year. What troubles me about this is that none of this, and maybe the days and weeks that this will now capture the Congress of the United States, is doing anything to solve the challenges that American families are facing in this economy. None of it's doing anything to secure the southern border of the United States. None of it's doing anything to lower the cost of energy that's putting a tremendous burden on American families. So I think Congress will continue to work its will. But for my part, if I'm President of the United States, I'm going to work really hard to create an environment in Washington, D.C. Where we focus men and women in both political parties on the challenges facing our country. I mean, I said at the very beginning, Meg, the reason I'm running for president is not because I want to find out what it's like to work in the White House. right? Been there, done that. I'm running for president of the United States because I think the country's in a lot of trouble. American families are hurting. The world's becoming more dangerous by the day. And the political performance art in Washington, D.C. does little to address the issues the American people are facing. If I'm president of the United States, we'll focus on the needs and the challenges and the opportunities and the future of the American people. So help me God.
I have one follow-up, and thank you for that. I have one follow-up. You know, after the events of January 6, 2021, there were countries abroad who expressed concern about the state of U.S. government. That was unprecedented and something that many felt was a symbol of perhaps some instability within the traditions of the United States government. I'm not likening the oustership of the House Speaker to January 6, certainly.
No.
But events like that, do you think that that does signal to our allies and other countries abroad that perhaps the institutions of U.S. government aren't as static or established as they might seem?
Well, look, as I said, January 6th was a tragic day. There was a riot at the Capitol. But thanks to the courage of law enforcement, the riot was quelled. We reconvened Congress the very same day, and we finished our work under the Constitution of the United States. I honestly believe that a day of tragedy, as the world watched, became a triumph of freedom, because our institutions and our Constitution held. Now, what's happening on Capitol Hill is happening under the rules of the Constitution and the rules of the Congress. To me, it's still unwelcome news, because at a time when so many Americans are hurting, to see the Congress turning inward on divisions, which ought to rightly be resolved at the beginning of the Congress. Then you elect a speaker, and then you move forward. And I'm disappointed by the news, but to your point, I would not liken it to that tragic day 2.5 years hence.
Thank you. We're going to go back here to students at Georgetown with one more question.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice President.
Good afternoon.
My name is Ashwath Tiranalaya. I am a student in the School of Health, studying healthcare management and policy. And today you've talked a lot about many different foreign policy issues. But my question is, if you're elected president, which of those issues is going to be your #1 priority?
I think the #1 priority of any president is to provide for the common defense. Because look, a strong America is a secure America. And a strong America is the pathway toward a more peaceful world. And as I said early on, I really do believe that while we have the strongest military on the planet today, China is working overtime to catch up and cross essentially our military spending is like this, China's military spending is like this. Those lines will cross. And it will not be a good day when they do. And if I'm president of the United States, we'll see to it that they never do. I think we've got to build a 355-ship Navy. I think we've got to build out our ballistic missile submarine program. I think we've got to modernize our strategic forces and bombers. If we do all of that, the world's a lot quieter. I promise you. You know, I really do believe that the fact that we made historic investments in our military, the largest increase in more than a generation, that we were willing to fire cruise missiles into Syria when they used chemical weapons on their own people, that we unleashed our military to take down the ISIS caliphate and their leader, and we took out Qasem Soleimani, the most dangerous terrorist in the world. I think all of those things were a reason why you didn't see countries like Russia attempt to redraw international lines by force during our time, because we had American power, and we demonstrated a willingness to use American hard power to defend our interests. Again, I go back to this, and it sounds like I'm doing politics, and I'm really not. This is true. Weakness arouses evil. And I mean to tell you that disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan has aroused authoritarian regimes around the world. You've heard a few of them, well, you may not have heard of before here, but with regard to China's ambitions in the Asia Pacific, with regard to Russia's war in Eastern Europe, I honestly believe that the antidote to all of that is a strength. So if I'm President of the United States, the first thing I'm going to do in the Oval Office on day one is pray, because I'm a man of prayer. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in leaders of the House and Senate in both parties, military leaders, and say, what do we need to build a military fitted to the times that will achieve security and peace in the 21st century?
Thank you. We have time for one final question from here at Georgetown.
Hello, Mr. Vice President. My question has to do with Iran. So in the past few months, Iran has continued to increase its enrichment of uranium despite international warnings. They've cracked down against peaceful Iranian protesters following the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini last year, and they've continued to foment chaos and unrest in the Middle East via their proxies. My question is, how would a Pence administration handle Iran?
Well, thank you for bringing up such an important issue. Look, we got out of the Iran nuclear deal. And the Biden administration spent the last 2.5 years publicly and privately begging the mullahs in Iran to get back into the deal. We talked about bringing home Americans that were held hostage overseas. I'm always glad to see Americans come home. But transferring $6 billion to the dictators and tyrants in Tehran in exchange for 6 Americans being freed was unconscionable. And I think it put Americans overseas around the world in danger. You should never pay ransom for American hostages. And yet this administration just did. And I just think it's part and parcel of that posture that you see in this administration over and over, of seeming to ignore many of our allies around the world while at the same time kowtowing to authoritarian regimes, whether it be after China with the balloon incident and the military provocations in the air and at sea, sends the Secretary of State to ask for a meeting. I would have sent an aircraft carrier, maybe 2. And with regard to Iran, I think we've got to send an unambiguous message that we're going to continue to expand the Abraham Accords. We're going to work to isolate Iran economically and diplomatically. And there's no more important message for us to send in the wider Middle East than America stands with Israel. That we will give Israel what Israel needs to defend itself by itself. But that in the event that Israel would be faced with a military attack, that America will stand by Israel, shoulder to shoulder, and defend our most cherished ally. It's that kind of unambiguous message, I think, made progress in the wider Middle East. That we put those heavy sanctions on Iran. We isolated them as never before. But now with this administration sending mixed signals, for heaven's sakes, you just saw Saudi Arabia and Iran just negotiate some kind of a treaty between the two of them. The lines are getting very blurred in that part of the world again. But Iran is the leading state sponsor of terrorism in the world, not just in that region. And I think it's absolutely essential that the next president of the United States be clear-eyed about that and get back to a policy of isolating Iran. Last thought, and the president of the United States needs to send a deafening message to the people of Iran that we are with you. The truth is that the majority of people in Iran are under the age of 40. It's a young population. It's a population that wants to breathe free. You look at the protests that have taken place in the streets, and particularly the courageous women in Iran who have been persecuted and jailed over the last 2 years to be attempted to be put down in silence by the mullahs. We've got to send a message to the people of Iran that we're with you, we're for you, we want to see you have freedom, but at the same time make it clear to Iran that we will not tolerate their malign influence, we will never tolerate them obtaining a nuclear weapon, and America will always stand with Israel, no matter what.
Thank you for that question. I have one more, particularly since you were hitting on that part of the world. The Saudis, Israelis, and the U.S. have been working on a potentially landmark diplomatic deal that would include Saudi recognition of Israel. Mm-hmm. Do you see this as a positive development?
I do. I think the dialogue is very positive. What I want to understand is the details of it. And I mean, in our case, we saw the first peace deal between Arab countries and Israel in more than 30 years. But it all began by recognizing that America stands with Israel, that we sent a clear and unambiguous message. After decades of America attempting to be an honest broker in the Middle East, we said, we're here, we're with Israel. If you want to deal in a fair-minded way with Israel, we'll facilitate that, and we'll help open up commerce and trade and cultural exchange, and we did. I've heard from some foreign policy friends about some issues in and around that, but I want to keep an open mind. And for my part, I mean, the Biden administration wouldn't even use the words Abraham Accords in the first 2 years. And now there's a little bit of an effort to try and expand peace in the region. But at a time when we see Saudi Arabia signing a peace agreement with Iran, I think it demands American leadership, and demands leadership with experience, who knows who we're dealing with, how to bring people to the table. And if I'm President of the United States, I promise you, we'll do just that.
Thank you for that, and that brings us to the end of our conversation here today. I want to thank you, Mr. Vice President, for your time and your willingness to take questions from me, as well as students here and across the country. And thank all of you for joining us for this first installment in what will be a series in collaboration between the Associated Press and Georgetown University. It's been really great for me as an alum to be back here on the Hilltop, and we hope you will tune in for the next installment in our series. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming out. Thanks, Clemson, New Hampshire, and Iowa State.
Thank you.